Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back. We're diving deep again today, and the sources you've shared are really pulling us in two directions at once, aren't they?
They really are. It's quite the contrast. On one side, we're looking, deep into the Arctic Ocean.
Right, at this incredible creature, a whale, that lives for centuries. And the idea is maybe the secret to a longer human life is hidden right there inside its cells.
Exactly. And then almost the opposite scale, we're looking way out into space.
Yeah, where Earth's magnetic shield, the thing that protects us all, is apparently, well, it's doing something unexpected, something electrically backward almost.
It's throwing our models for a loop, definitely,
Yeah.
forcing a rethink of how that cosmic protection system actually works.
It's this amazing juxtaposition, isn't it? The incredibly small, the cellular, potentially holding keys to the grand scale of human life, and the incredibly large, the planetary scale, showing unexpected, almost microscopic electrical weirdness.
It really sets the stage perfectly for what we're trying to do here. You, our listeners, you've given us this huge stack of global updates. I mean, everything from these really cutting-edge scientific discoveries we just mentioned,
To some very high-stakes geopolitical games being played out.
the government shutdown in the U.S., which seems to be deepening.
And unfortunately, the aftermath of a truly devastating hurricane in the Caribbean. Just a massive amount of information.
And our mission, as always, is to try and unpack all of this, to pull out the most surprising bits, the most relevant implications, and talk through them, conversationally but thoroughly, give you that shortcut to being really informed.
So today's scope is pretty vast. We're hitting major breakthroughs in biology, rethinking consciousness itself, actually, then physics, the Earth's magnetosphere.
We're also digging into the global tech race, this sort of quiet but intense competition shaping the future.
And then the domestic side, the U.S. political stalemate, the shutdown fallout.
And finally, that crucial story of recovery and resilience in the Caribbean after Hurricane Melissa. It's a lot to cover, so we should probably jump right in. Let's start small, like you said, down at the cellular level, but with maybe the biggest possible prize: unlocking the secrets to human longevity. Sounds like a plan. Where better to start than with the bowhead whale?
Exactly. The idea that we could live significantly longer, healthier lives, it's a dream, right? But maybe nature already figured it out. These bowhead whales, they live for how long?
It's honestly staggering. We're talking upwards of 200 years. They are the longest living mammals we know of, period.
200 years. In the Arctic, no less. That's not exactly a gentle environment.
Not at all. It's incredibly harsh. Think about the cold, the pressure, the sheer number of cell divisions over 2 centuries, the constant environmental stresses.
So logically, they must have some incredible way of fighting off what gets most complex life in the end, right? Things like cancer, cellular breakdown, just aging.
That's precisely the thinking. They must possess extraordinary defense mechanisms. And that's not just, a guess. Scientists are actively studying them because of this longevity.
So it's moved beyond just marveling at their age. This is focused research now. What exactly are they looking for? Is it like one magic gene or...
Well, it's rarely that simple in biology.
Unfortunately.
But the focus is very much on their enhanced DNA repair mechanisms.
Yeah.
That seems to be the core of it.
DNA repair. Okay.
Sure.
Our bodies do that too, but obviously not well enough to get us to 200.
Right. Our repair systems decline with age, they get overwhelmed, mistakes happen, mutations accumulate. The bowhead whales seem to have found ways to keep those systems incredibly efficient and robust throughout their entire lifespan.
What's different in their cellular toolkit?
Researchers have identified some really interesting genetic adaptations. For instance, they seem to have unique versions or maybe just boosted functions of key protective genes. One pathway that gets a lot of attention is the p53 tumor suppressor pathway.
P53. I've heard that called the guardian of the genome. It's crucial for stopping cells with damaged DNA from multiplying, basically preventing cancer.
Exactly. It's absolutely fundamental. In humans, failures or mutations in p53 are linked to a huge number of cancers and also seem to play a role in the aging process itself.
So the whales have, what, a supercharged P53?
It looks like they might have effectively dialed up the function of proteins like p53 and others involved in similar protective roles. They also appear to have highly efficient enzymes, specialized proteins, that can quickly find and repair DNA damage before it becomes a permanent mutation or triggers the cell to stop dividing, which is called senescence.
So it's like their cellular maintenance crew is just faster, better equipped, and works tirelessly for 200 years.
That's a great way to put it. And the real application here for humans is understanding how they do it. If scientists can isolate the specific proteins responsible for this super protection, figure out their structure, how they work.
Maybe we could replicate it, develop drugs or therapies that boost our own DNA repair.
That's the dream. It could lead to entirely new therapeutic approaches for age-related diseases, from cancer to neurodegeneration, maybe even slowing the aging process itself. It's shifting longevity research away from just treating symptoms towards fixing the fundamental underlying mechanisms, using nature's own solution as a blueprint.
It's incredible potential, taking lessons from a 200-year-old whale to potentially rewrite our own biological clocks. It is. And speaking of fundamental rewrites, let's pivot from the foundation of long life to the very foundation of our experience: consciousness.
Right, this is another area where the standard view is getting a major shakeup. For decades, the assumption was that consciousness, our awareness, our subjective feeling of being here, resides primarily in the neocortex.
Yeah, that big, wrinkly outer layer of the brain. The part that's most developed in humans, responsible for language, complex thought, planning. It seemed logical that awareness would live there too.
But the sources you shared suggest neurobiologists are increasingly challenging that. They are. The paradigm is definitely shifting. It's not that the neocortex isn't important. It clearly handles the content of our conscious experience, the thoughts, the perceptions, but the actual state of being conscious, the awareness itself, seems to depend critically on older, deeper brain regions.
Subcortical regions, you mean? Structures beneath the cortex.
Exactly. We're talking about evolutionarily older parts of the brain, structures that are, more fundamental, almost primal in a way. Key players appear to be the thalamus and the claustrum.
Okay, the thalamus. I know that acts like a relay station for sensory information, right? Directing sights and sounds up to the cortex.
It does much more than just relay. It filters, it modulates, it plays a huge role in deciding what information from the senses even reaches the cortex to potentially become part of our conscious awareness. It's involved in regulating sleep, wakefulness, alertness, all fundamental to consciousness.
And the claustrum, that one's less familiar.
The claustrum is fascinating and still a bit mysterious. It's this very thin, irregular sheet of neurons tucked away deep inside, but it has connections reaching out to almost every part of the cortex.
Wow, so it's incredibly well connected. What's the theory about its role?
One leading hypothesis, championed by researchers like Christoph Koch, is that the claustrum acts as a kind of conductor for consciousness. It might be the structure that binds together all the disparate pieces of information processed in different cortical areas. The sight of an object, its sound, the feeling it evokes, the memory it triggers into a single, unified, seamless conscious experience. The feeling of now.
So the neocortex provides the orchestra players, the different senses, thoughts, emotions, but the claustrum is the conductor, making them play together as one coherent piece. That's a really good analogy. Integrates everything into that subjective whole. And this ties into another fascinating concept mentioned in the sources, the Jennifer Aniston neuron. Slight chuckle, right? I saw that. Explain that one. It sounds a bit specific.
It comes from research, primarily in epilepsy patients, who had electrodes implanted for monitoring. Scientists found individual neurons, often in the temporal lobe, that would fire reliably and almost exclusively in response to a very specific concept.
Like literally seeing a picture of Jennifer Aniston.
Or hearing her name, or even just thinking about her. One neuron, or a small cluster, seemed dedicated to that specific concept. They found similar neurons for other famous people, landmarks, even specific objects.
Okay, that shows incredible specificity in the cortex. But how does that single neuron firing for Jennifer Aniston become part of my conscious awareness of seeing her picture and recognizing her and maybe remembering a movie she was in all at the same time?
That's precisely where the older structures, like the claustrum, likely come in. The specialized cortical neurons handle the specific recognition, the what. But the claustrum, receiving input from all these specialized areas, might be what binds the Jennifer Aniston recognition signal with the seeing a photograph signal from the visual cortex and the feeling of familiarity signal from emotional centers into one unified conscious moment.
It synchronizes the orchestra.
Exactly. It takes these highly localized, differentiated signals and integrates them. This model also helps explain why these deeper structures, the thalamus and claustrum, often remain active even when the cortex is largely offline, like during certain stages of sleep or under anesthesia.
Because they provide the basic platform for consciousness, even if the complex content from the cortex isn't being generated or integrated.
That seems to be the idea. They might be maintaining a foundational level of arousal or potential for awareness, the prerequisite state upon which the richer content provided by the cortex can be built when we're awake and alert. It really shifts our view of where the self fundamentally resides.
It really does. Less in the complex thoughts, more in the underlying state of being aware. Profound stuff. Okay, let's jump scales again from the deep inner space of the brain to the vastness of outer space surrounding our planet.
All right. We're talking about Earth's magnetosphere.
Her planet's invisible shield. Absolutely vital, right? Protects us from nasty solar wind, cosmic rays.
Couldn't live without it. It deflects the vast majority of charged particles coming from the sun and deep space. Our standard understanding, our models, have generally depicted a certain pattern of electrical charge flowing within this massive magnetic bubble, mostly positive, driven by the solar-wind interaction.
But new data is challenging that standard picture.
Significantly, groundbreaking data, especially highlighted by findings from Japanese satellite missions, has revealed something really unexpected, a kind of reversed electric field.
Reversed. How so?
Specifically, on the morning side of the magnetosphere, the side rotating into sunlight instruments are detecting a consistent and pronounced negative electrical charge.
Negative. But we thought it was generally positive. That's a complete polarity flip for that region.
It is. It shows the interaction between the solar wind and our magnetic field is much more complex and dynamic than our simpler models assumed.
Is this negative charge everywhere or just in that morning sector?
It seems most prominent in the equatorial regions of that morning side. Closer to the poles, the expected positive charge still dominates. So it's not uniform, it's geographically specific within the magnetosphere.
Why? What's happening on the morning side specifically to cause this flip?
Well, it likely comes down to the detailed physics of the solar-wind interaction. On the morning side, the solar wind plasma hits Earth's magnetic field lines at a more oblique angle compared to the nose facing the sun. This geometry seems to favor processes like magnetic reconnection, where field lines break and reconnect in a way that efficiently separates positive and negative charges.
Ah, so the angle of attack changes the electrical dynamics.
It seems so. This dynamic charge separation generates that negative potential, that negative voltage in that region. Our older models, often based on more simplified assumptions about the interaction, just didn't capture this level of detail.
So we thought we had a relatively smooth, predictable shield, but it's actually got these significant electrical asymmetries and is more, well, volatile.
That's a good way to put it. More complex, definitely more dynamic.
Yeah.
And this isn't just an academic curiosity. It has very real-world consequences.
Okay, let's talk implications. Why does knowing about this negative charge matter?
Primarily, it forces a major refinement of our space weather models. These models are crucial for predicting things like geomagnetic storms.
Which are caused by big blasts of particles from the sun hitting the magnetosphere, right?
Exactly. And those storms can have serious impacts on our technology. They can induce currents in power grids, causing blackouts. They can disrupt radio communications, damage satellites, and significantly degrade the accuracy of GPS, Global Positioning System signal.
So if our models don't account for this negative charge zone, they might miscalculate how a storm will develop or where its effects will be strongest.
Precisely. Understanding the actual charge distribution and flow within the magnetosphere is fundamental to predicting how energy from the sun gets transferred into our near-Earth environment during a storm. Better models mean better warnings, better mitigation strategies for vulnerable infrastructure.
It could even affect astronauts in space, I imagine, predicting radiation exposure.
Absolutely. Especially for missions beyond low Earth orbit, like going back to the moon or to Mars. Knowing the radiation environment accurately is critical for astronaut safety. This new understanding adds another layer to that complex picture.
And speaking of going back to the moon, there's a related update here about the pace of that effort, isn't there? Ties into the need for good space environment knowledge.
There is. The pressure is definitely on NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to meet its ambitious timeline for the Artemis 3 mission landing humans back on the lunar surface, hopefully in the mid-2020s.
That timeline has always seemed tight.
It is. And to try and accelerate things, SpaceX, which is providing the lunar lander based on their Starship vehicle, is reportedly exploring ways to simplify the mission architecture.
Simplify how? Fewer steps. Less complex hardware.
Potentially both. The idea is to streamline the elements of Starship needed for that initial landing, perhaps reducing the number of launches required or simplifying the in-space refueling process. Fewer moving parts, Fewer mission stages means potentially fewer things that can cause delays.
Trying to cut corners, essentially, to meet the deadline, although hopefully not cutting safety corners.
Well, streamlining is the official term. But yes, the goal is clearly to make the path to the lunar surface quicker and perhaps less complex than initially planned. It underscores the urgency, but also, as you said, highlights how crucial it is to have accurate models of the space environment they'll be traveling through, including those complex magnetosphere dynamics we just discussed. You don't want surprises when you're sending people that far.
No kidding. Okay, from the complexities of space weather and lunar ambitions, let's bring it back down to Earth and look at the foundations shaping our technological and economic future. This feels like a major shift in focus.
It is, but it's all interconnected. The technologies we develop, the economic battles we fight, they define our capabilities, including how we operate in space or deal with aging. Good point. Let's start with something that sounds almost like science fiction, but researchers are genuinely pursuing it. Room temperature superconductors. The ultimate holy grail of material science, you can definitely call it that. It's been the dream for physicists for decades. Just to clarify for everyone, a superconductor is a material that conducts electricity with absolutely zero resistance. None.
Zero resistance means no energy loss is heat, right?
Exactly. Perfect efficiency. The problem is, the superconductors we have today only work at incredibly low temperatures, close to absolute zero, typically requiring expensive and bulky cooling systems using things like liquid helium or liquid nitrogen.
Which limits their use to specialized applications, MRI machines, particle accelerators.
Right. Highly controlled environments. A room temperature superconductor would be a material that achieves this zero resistance state at, well, room temperature technically defined as at or above 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit, something you wouldn't need extreme cooling for.
If we could find such a material, the impact would be just revolutionary, wouldn't it?
Revolutionary doesn't even begin to cover it. It would transform society. Think about power transmission. Right now, we lose a significant percentage of electricity generated just to heat in the power lines. Superconducting wires would mean near zero loss, massive energy savings, huge implications for climate change.
Okay, that's huge. What else?
Computing. Current chips generate heat due to resistance, which limits how small and fast we can make them. Superconducting electronics could lead to ultra-fast, ultra-compact devices that produce virtually no heat.
So quantum computers become more practical, maybe? Or just radically faster classical computers?
Potentially both. Then there's transportation. Maglev, magnetic levitation trains, which use powerful magnets to float, become much more economically feasible if the magnets can be superconducting without massive cooling costs. Imagine silent, high-speed trains everywhere.
And medical technology. You mentioned MRIs.
Existing MRIs rely on superconducting magnets cooled by helium. Room temperature versions could make MRI machines much cheaper, smaller, more accessible, and potentially much more powerful, leading to better diagnostics. It touches almost every aspect of modern technology.
So the hunt is intense, and there's news of a potential theoretical breakthrough from Penn State University using something called entropy theory.
Yes, this is an interesting development on the theoretical front. Researchers there have developed a new predictive model that aims to sort of shortcut the search for these materials.
How does entropy help? What is it?
It's a novel approach that blends classical physics concepts with ideas from quantum mechanics and even information theory. Instead of just randomly testing materials or relying solely on existing superconductivity theories, entropy theory tries to calculate the optimal arrangement of atoms and electrons in a material structure, the lattice, to allow electrons to flow without resistance.
So it's like using math and information principles to figure out the perfect atomic blueprint for superconductivity.
That's the core idea. It treats the arrangement of particles not just as a physical system, but as an information system. The model tries to find the structure with the right kind of information content, or configurational entropy, hence entropy that correlates with the superconducting state at higher temperatures. It's a way to guide experimentalists towards the most promising material structures to synthesize and test.
That sounds much more targeted than just trial and error, a theoretical roadmap.
It is. It offers a potential pathway to accelerate discovery. However, and this is a big however in this field, we need to inject a note of caution.
Because the history of room temperature superconductor claims is volatile.
Extremely volatile. Just recently, as mentioned in the sources, there was a high-profile retraction of a study published in the prestigious journal Nature. That study had claimed the discovery of a room temperature superconductor generating huge excitement.
But it couldn't be replicated. Or there were data issues.
Concerns were raised about the data analysis and reproducibility. The retraction highlights just how difficult this research is and how high the burden of proof must be. Extraordinary claims require absolutely extraordinary, rigorously verified, and independently replicated evidence.
So while the entropy theory offers a promising new theoretical tool, we need to wait for solid, repeatable experimental confirmation before declaring victory.
Absolutely. The promise is immense, but the scientific process demands skepticism and rigorous validation, especially in a field with such a history of dashed hopes.
Okay, a crucial dose of realism there. Now, let's shift from the theoretical frontiers of physics to the very real, very strategic US-China tech contest. This isn't just about gadgets, is it? It's about foundational power.
Exactly. This is the quiet but incredibly significant long-term competition over who builds and controls the essential technological infrastructure of the 21st century.
Yeah.
It's not about fiery rhetoric or tariffs anymore, so much as it is about building productive, durable, and crucially trusted systems.
And the sources suggest China has established a pretty commanding lead in certain key areas, particularly manufacturing and clean energy tech.
The numbers are quite stark. China currently dominates over 80%, 80, of the global supply chain for critical clean technologies, especially solar energy components. That's a massive chokehold.
80%, wow. And it's not just solar.
No. They are also the world leader by far in electric vehicle, EV sales and production, and they lead significantly in the installation and use of industrial robots in manufacturing. This creates an incredibly strong foundation in advanced manufacturing and the technologies underpinning the green transition.
So where does the U.S. hold an edge in this contest?
The primary U.S. advantage remains in cutting-edge innovation, particularly in artificial intelligence, AI. The U.S. ecosystem of universities, research labs, and venture capital continues to drive many of the most significant AI breakthroughs and attracts enormous private investment.
But even that strength comes with a potential downside, right? The environmental cost.
It does. The relentless growth in AI capabilities requires staggering amounts of computational power. This translates into a boom in building massive energy-hungry data centers,
Which consume vast amounts of electricity and often water for cooling.
Exactly. And this is starting to raise serious environmental concerns in local U.S. communities where these centers are being built, straining power grids, water resources. It's a hidden cost of the AI boom that needs addressing.
Meanwhile, Europe is trying not to get caught entirely between these two giants.
Right. Europe is acutely aware of its dependency on both U.S. AI platforms and Chinese hardware manufacturing. They're making significant investments, trying to build up their own sovereign capabilities in AI and other critical technologies, aiming for strategic autonomy. But it's a difficult path.
A key factor in this long-term tech contest is always talent getting the best minds. And there's been a significant move highlighted in the sources involving a top robotics expert.
Yes, this is a potentially very significant development. A highly respected expert named Peng Zibo, who is a senior principal scientist specializing in industrial chips and robotics at ABB in Sweden. ABB is the global leader in automation technology, has returned to China.
Returned to China to do what? Academia. Industry.
He's joined Peking University as a tenured professor in their School of Advanced Manufacturing and Robotics.
Okay, that's not just a random career move. Moving from a top role at a global tech giant to a leading Chinese university. That sounds strategic.
It absolutely looks strategic. His specific expertise is in areas like robotic embodiment intelligence, and notably, his own proprietary cloud fog automation framework. This framework integrates cloud computing with localized fog computing for more efficient and intelligent industrial automation.
And that expertise aligns directly with China's national goals.
Perfectly. It feeds directly into China's ambitions outlined in their 15th five-year plan, which heavily emphasizes upgrading the nation's manufacturing capabilities through smart technology, automation, and robotics. Getting a world-class expert like Peng Zibo back is a major win for accelerating those goals. It underscores that this tech contest is fundamentally a battle for human capital.
A battle for brains. Okay, let's shift from the strategic flow of talent to the immediate signals from the financial markets. Big tech earnings often tell a story. What's happening with Amazon?
Amazon had a very strong quarter, leading to a significant stock surge. Analysts were calling it potentially their best trading day since way back in 2022.
What drove the optimism? They seem to be facing some headwinds previously.
The core driver was a really robust performance in their cloud computing division, AWS, Amazon Web Services. AWS growth was strong, beating expectations. Overall, the company reported a 38% jump in profitability and a 13% rise in revenue.
30% profit rise is huge, so the cloud business is still the engine.
It absolutely is. And crucially, the market sentiment seems to have shifted regarding Amazon's role in the AI boom. For a while, there were questions about whether they were keeping pace. Now, the consensus seems to be, as one analyst put it, the AI narrative has flipped positive for Amazon.
Meaning investors now believe AWS is well-positioned to capture a large chunk of the massive spending on AI infrastructure.
Exactly. And Amazon's leadership seems to agree. They significantly raised their forecast for capital expenditure spending on things like data centers and servers to a massive $125 billion. That's a huge signal of confidence that they need to keep investing heavily to meet the demand driven by AI.
Okay, so a strong signal from Amazon. How does that compare to, say, a traditional giant like ExxonMobil? Different sector, obviously, but a major economic indicator.
A stark contrast, really, driven by different market forces. ExxonMobil reported a fall in earnings for the quarter,
Why is the dip?
primarily due to lower oil prices during that period. Global oil prices softened, partly because OPEC plus nations, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus allies like Russia, actually increased production, adding more supply to the market.
So basic supply and demand hitting their bottom line. Are they just accepting lower profits or are they adjusting?
They're definitely adjusting. While overall profits were down due to the price environment, Exxon is actively counterbalancing this by significantly increasing its own oil and gas production in key, highly profitable areas. They highlighted rising output from major projects in Guyana, offshore South America, and the Permian Basin in the U.S.
So focusing on volume in their most efficient fields to offset the lower price per barrel.
That seems to be the strategy. It's a classic move for major oil companies navigating price volatility, maximize production where your costs are lowest and margins are highest. It shows how these legacy energy firms are adapting to the shifting global energy landscape.
Interesting contrast. Amazon betting big on the AI future, Exxon managing the present realities of the oil market. Now, we absolutely have to talk about this bizarre story out of South Korea.
Slight chuckle. Oh, this one is truly something else. It involves NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang.
The head of the $5 trillion AI chip behemoth, what did he do? Announce a new super chip.
No, nothing quite so conventional. He was simply spotted having dinner, but it was who he was having dinner with and where that caused the stir.
Okay, who are his dinner companions? Two other absolute titans of Korean industry. Samsung Electronics chair Jae-Y Lee and Hyundai Motor executive chair Chung Wi-sun. Three huge figures in global tech and manufacturing. All right, a power dinner. Makes sense. But where did they eat? Some fancy Michelin-starred place.
Nope. They were photographed eating at a local fried chicken restaurant called Kanbu Chicken in Seoul, South Korea.
Chuckles Fried Chicken. A summit over fried chicken.
Apparently so. And pictures of this surprisingly casual, high-powered dinner went viral on South Korean social media.
Okay. So people were amused, maybe. What's the market angle?
This is the truly wild part. The social media frenzy somehow translated into a massive stock market rally. For a different fried chicken company, shares of Kyochon F&B, a competitor to Kanbu Chicken, listed on the Kosdaq market, soared by 20%.
Wait, what? Just because Jensen Huang ate some fried chicken, a competitor stock jumped 20%?
That seems to be exactly what happened. There's no rational business connection. It seems to be purely a case of viral social media influence, maybe some speculative buying frenzy based on the association, however tangential.
That is peak market absurdity. It perfectly illustrates how irrational and sentiment-driven markets can be, especially in the short term. Forget fundamentals, just track CEO dinner choices.
Chuckles. It's certainly a memorable anecdote about market psychology. And, it provides quite a jarring contrast, that kind of almost random, hyper-volatile market reaction compared to the situation we're seeing in Washington, D.C. right now.
Yes. Let's make that pivot. From the absurdity of fried chicken stocks to the grinding, high-stakes rigidity of the U.S. government shutdown. It's been going on for a while now, hasn't it?
Over 30 days, and the impacts are really starting to bite, moving beyond inconvenience into potentially serious territory.
What are some of the specific consequences being reported?
Well, there are deeply concerning reports about national security implications. The FBI, Federal Bureau of Investigation, has apparently warned that the lack of funding is hindering their ability to pay confidential informants.
No money for informants. That could cripple intelligence gathering.
Absolutely. It potentially leaves blind spots in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, organized crime investigations. It's a serious risk. On a more visible level, hundreds of thousands of federal employees are either furloughed, sent home without pay, or deemed essential, and forced to work without knowing when their next paycheck will arrive.
That must be incredibly stressful for those families. And we're seeing effects on public services too, like air travel.
Yes. The sources mention over 9,000 flight delays and cancellations being attributed, at least in part, to shortages of essential personnel like air traffic controllers and TSA, Transportation Security Administration, screeners, many of whom are working under immense strain without pay.
It affects the whole economy. Is there an estimated cost for this shutdown?
The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, which is the nonpartisan analytical arm of Congress, has put out preliminary estimates. They reckon the economic cost is already somewhere in the range of $7 billion to $14 billion, and obviously that number grows every day the shutdown continues. Lost productivity, delayed contracts, reduced consumer spending. It adds up fast.
So what's the political roadblock? Why can't they pass a spending bill to reopen the government? It seems to center on the Senate filibuster rule again.
The filibuster is definitely a central piece of the puzzle. President Donald Trump has been very vocal, publicly urging Senate Republicans to use the so-called nuclear option.
Which means changing the Senate rules to allow spending bills, or potentially other legislation, to pass with just a simple majority, 51 votes, instead of the 60 votes currently needed to overcome a filibuster, to break a delaying tactic by the minority party.
Exactly. President Trump has framed it as necessary to overcome what he calls obstruction by crazed lunatics in the Democratic Party, arguing the minority shouldn't be able to dictate the legislative agenda.
The filibuster is a long-standing Senate tradition, though heavily debated. But beyond the procedural fight, there's a specific and highly controversial bargaining strategy being employed, isn't there, involving food aid.
Yes, and this has drawn significant criticism. Both House Speaker Mike Johnson and Vice President J.D. Vance have, quite openly, according to the sources, admitted that holding back funding for the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, what used to be called food stamps, is part of their political strategy.
Wait, they're admitting to using food assistance for the poor as leverage.
That appears to be the tactic. The political calculation seems to be that cutting off or threatening SNAP funding puts immense pressure on Democratic lawmakers, as the program disproportionately benefits lower-income constituents often represented by Democrats. The hope is this pressure will force Democrats to concede on other aspects of the larger budget bill favored by Republicans.
That seems incredibly cynical, and it has real-world consequences for people struggling to afford food.
Absolutely. The sources specifically mention the situation in places like Alaska, where residents in remote communities heavily reliant on SNAP were reportedly starting to stockpile traditional foods, hunting moose and caribou, fishing out of fear the federal aid would be cut off. It really highlights the human cost when essential services become political bargaining chips in these high-level procedural battles.
A grim illustration of political hardball. Okay, let's widen the lens again, moving from the domestic deadlock to the international stage. There seems to be a slight thaw, perhaps, in U.S.-China relations.
A cautious one, maybe. Following a recent meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Trump announced what he called a prospective one-year truce in the ongoing trade war.
A truce. Does that mean rolling back tariffs? Or just pausing further escalation?
It sounds more like a pause and an agreement to talk. Experts quoted in the sources interpreted the meeting as bringing back a measure of relative calm to the relationship. There's talk of planning regular summits between the leaders and working toward a potential trade deal soon.
What would a deal cover? The same old issues.
The reports mention key U.S. demands like increased Chinese purchases of American soybeans, crucial for Trump's agricultural base, and also greater Chinese cooperation in cracking down on the production and export of illicit fentanyl, which fuels the U.S. opioid crisis.
So a potential stabilization, at least temporarily. But interestingly, even as the White House signals a truce, there's pushback from within the U.S. government itself, specifically the Senate, against Trump's broader trade policies.
Yes, that's a really significant countercurrent. The U.S. Senate recently passed a measure, with notable bipartisan support, aimed at ending the global tariffs that the Trump administration had imposed on goods from over 100 countries using national security justifications.
Bipartisan support to roll back Trump's tariffs. That's surprising.
It is. What made it particularly noteworthy was that 4 Republican senators broke ranks with their party in the administration to vote in favor of ending the tariffs.
Why would they do that?
It signals a potential shift in trade thinking, perhaps reflecting pressure from influential business groups and constituents, especially in agriculture and manufacturing, who have been hurt by retaliatory tariffs from other countries and supply chain disruptions. They might be prioritizing stable global market access over the administration's more protectionist stance. It shows internal division on trade policy.
Interesting. Meanwhile, on the multilateral stage, President Xi Jinping seems to have capitalized on President Trump's absence at a major summit.
That happened at the recent APEC Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, which was held this year in South Korea. President Trump chose to skip it.
And Xi Jinping stepped into the vacuum.
Very much so. He used the platform to deliver a strong defense of multilateralism, free trade, and the importance of maintaining open global supply chains. It was a clear attempt to position China as the stable, reliable leader in the region, contrasting with perceived U.S. unpredictability.
A strategic diplomatic play. Although, were other Asian nations entirely buying China's message, given China's own recent economic actions, like threatening rare earth mineral restrictions?
That's the underlying tension. While Xi presented China as the champion of free trade, many regional players remain wary of China's own economic leverage and assertive actions. So, it was a strategic message, but received with a degree of skepticism in some quarters. Okay, now let's turn to a more alarming development. Renewed talk about nuclear weapons testing. President Trump suggested the U.S. might resume testing. Yes, this caused quite a stir globally. President Trump floated the idea of resuming underground nuclear weapons tests, something the U.S. hasn't done since 1992.
Why now? What's the justification?
His stated rationale was a concern that the U.S. nuclear arsenal is somehow lagging behind advancements allegedly being made by Russia and China, even though neither of those countries has conducted a nuclear test in decades either. The suggestion is seen by many analysts as a potential bargaining tactic, a way to pressure Russia and China into new arms control negotiations by signaling a willingness to restart testing.
How was this received internationally? Not well, I imagine.
Not well at all. The sources mention Iran's foreign minister immediately condemning it as regressive and irresponsible, warning it could trigger a new global arms race.
What about domestically? Is there support for this within the administration?
Vice President J.D. Vance was quoted as supporting the idea, framing it not as aggressive, but as necessary prudence ensuring the safety, security, and functionality of America's existing, aging nuclear stockpile through testing.
So a stockpile stewardship argument versus a potential arms race trigger argument. What was Russia's reaction?
Russian officials reacted sharply. Senior lawmaker Andrei Kartopolov, who chairs the Defense Committee in the Russian parliament, specifically warned about Trump's rhetoric. He suggested that Trump's boasts about the size and capability of the U.S. arsenal might imply the U.S. is already potentially violating the limits set by the New START Treaty, the last remaining major arms control agreement between the U.S. and Russia, which caps deployed strategic warheads.
So Russia is hinting at potential treaty violations based on Trump's own words. That definitely escalates tensions.
It does. Any talk of resuming testing or breaching existing treaties sends ripples of anxiety through the international community, raising fears of a new, destabilizing nuclear arms race.
A deeply concerning development. Let's move from these superpower tensions to ongoing regional conflicts. The situation in Sudan sounds particularly dire.
It's a catastrophic humanitarian crisis that continues to escalate. The focus recently has been on the city of El Fasher in the Darfur region, which was recently overrun by the paramilitary group known as the RSF, Rapid Support Forces.
And the reports coming out are horrific.
Truly harrowing. Survivors are giving accounts of widespread atrocities, mass killings, targeted ethnic violence, public executions. There were reports of massacres, including one alleged at a hospital. The violence seems aimed at terrorizing and displacing the local non-Arab populations.
Has there been an international response?
The U.S. Security Council issued a strong condemnation of the violence and called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. But the situation on the ground remains chaotic and extremely dangerous.
And the conflict is being fueled by outside powers. There was an accusation leveled at the UN.
Yes, in a very unusual and public confrontation during a Security Council meeting, the representative of Sudan's army-led government directly accused the United Arab Emirates, UAE, of actively supporting and supplying weapons to the RSF.
And the UAE denies this.
They strongly deny the accusations. But this public finger-pointing highlights the complex regional dynamics at play. The fear is that such external interference, if true, is just pouring fuel on the fire, prolonging the conflict and making any peace settlement much harder to achieve. It risks turning Sudan into a wider proxy war, a tragic situation with deep regional implications. Now, shifting from a nation in conflict to an institution undergoing a major internal shakeup, the British monarchy and the Prince Andrew situation. Yes, King Charles III made a very decisive, some are calling it brutal, move regarding his younger brother, Prince Andrew.
This relates to the long-running controversy surrounding Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein and the subsequent allegations against him. Precisely. Despite Andrew stepping back from public duties years ago, the scandal has continued to cast a shadow. King Charles has now taken the final steps, stripping Andrew of his remaining royal titles and, significantly, ordering him to vacate his longtime residence, the Royal Lodge, a substantial property on the Windsor estate. So he's effectively being evicted and losing his official status entirely.
That's the essence of it. He loses his Royal Highness styling and his connection to official royal residences. The media reaction was swift, with headlines like, "The Andrew formerly known as Prince," really underscoring the finality and severity of the decision.
Why now? What does this move signify for the monarchy under Charles?
It seems to be a clear, calculated move to protect the institution itself. In an era of intense public scrutiny and demands for accountability, the monarchy simply cannot afford to be tainted by association with such serious and persistent scandal, regardless of family ties. It reflects Charles's understanding that the monarchy's survival depends on maintaining public trust and adapting to modern expectations of transparency and ethical conduct. It's a form of institutional self-preservation.
A stark example of an ancient institution having to make very modern, very tough decisions. Finally, in this section, let's look at a major societal conflict playing out in Israel over military service.
Yes, this involved a massive protest rally in Jerusalem, dubbed the March of the Million by organizers, although attendance was likely in the tens, perhaps hundreds of thousands. It consisted primarily of ultra-Orthodox Jews, also known as Haredim,
And they were protesting against
mandatory military service in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. Historically, large numbers of Haredi men have received exemptions from the draft to allow them to pursue full-time religious studies in yeshivas. There's been ongoing political and legal pressure to end these exemptions and conscript Haredim equally alongside secular Israelis.
And their message at the rally was defiant.
Extremely defiant. The core message, repeated by speakers and on signs, was that they would choose imprisonment over being forced into military service. They frame it as an existential issue for preserving their religious way of life and devotion to Torah study, which they see as essential to protecting Israel in its own spiritual way.
This obviously taps into a very deep and long-standing division within Israeli society, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's one of the most fundamental social fissures. Secular and many religious Zionist Israelis resent what they see as an unfair shirking of the national burden of defense by a large and growing segment of the population. They argue for equal service. The Haredi community argues their religious devotion is paramount and incompatible with army life.
So this mass protest was a powerful demonstration of their refusal to compromise on this issue.
Yes, it was a major show of force aimed at political leaders considering changes to the draft law. It highlights how incredibly difficult it is for Israel to balance the demands of national security, principles of equality, and the fiercely protected autonomy of its ultra-Orthodox communities. It remains a deeply volatile political challenge.
Indeed. It seems everywhere we look, established structures, political systems, alliances, even monarchies and societal contracts are under immense strain, struggling to adapt. Let's shift now to crises driven not by politics, but by the raw power of nature and urgent threats to public health.
Right, and unfortunately, the first story here is one of immense devastation.
We need to talk about the impact of Hurricane Melissa in the Caribbean. This was a monster storm.
A true catastrophe. Melissa slammed into the region as a Category 5 hurricane, the highest rating on the Saffir-Simpson scale. The level of destruction, particularly in Jamaica and Haiti, has been immense.
What are the latest reports on the human cost?
The confirmed death toll is tragically high and likely to rise further as recovery efforts continue. The sources confirm at least 49 fatalities across the affected islands, with 19 deaths confirmed in Jamaica and 30 in Haiti. Haiti suffered particularly severe flooding in addition to wind damage.
And beyond the loss of life, the physical destruction.
Widespread. In Jamaica alone, reports indicate over 170 communities suffered significant damage. Infrastructure took a massive hit: roads, bridges, buildings. At the peak, something like 70% of Jamaica's electricity customers lost power. The storm packed sustained winds approaching 300 kilometers per hour, or about 185 miles per hour. Just ferocious power.
Category 5 winds are almost unimaginable, and the economic impact on these island nations must be crippling.
Absolutely devastating. These are economies often heavily reliant on tourism and agriculture, both of which were wiped out instantly. The preliminary estimates for the total economic damage are just staggering, somewhere between $48 billion and $52 billion US.
$50 billion. For countries like Jamaica and Haiti, that's an almost insurmountable figure. They already face economic challenges.
Exactly. High external debt, vulnerability to external shocks. A blow like this sets back development potentially for years, if not decades. It guarantees immense long-term hardship and dependence on international aid for rebuilding.
Has the aid response started to mobilize?
Yes. Thankfully, both international organizations and regional neighbors are stepping up. The IFRC, International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, quickly launched an emergency appeal for funding. Major corporations with ties to the region, like the Royal Caribbean Group, pledged significant support. They committed $1 million.
And neighboring countries are helping too.
Yes. It was noted that Venezuela, despite its own significant challenges, managed to dispatch 36 tons of humanitarian aid, food, water, medical supplies to both Cuba and Jamaica, which were heavily impacted. It shows regional solidarity even amidst political difficulties.
That's encouraging. And there were also efforts from within Jamaica itself, particularly from the entertainment community.
Yes, that was quite prominent. Jamaican celebrities really leveraged their international profiles and resources. Grammy-winning reggae artist Shaggy partnered with a Florida attorney, Dan Newland, to use private jets to fly in critical supplies like water purification tablets and medical necessities directly to affected areas.
Using their reach effectively.
And dancehall superstar Sean Paul launched a major fundraising campaign, pledging to match donations up to a significant amount. This kind of local mobilization, leveraging celebrity influence and community spirit, is absolutely vital in the immediate aftermath, often getting aid to places faster than larger international efforts can manage. It complements the bigger picture.
A testament to resilience amidst tragedy. Okay, let's move from the acute crisis of the hurricane to pressing public health concerns that have emerged recently. There's worrying new data regarding COVID-19 and pregnancy outcomes.
Yes. This is a significant finding that seems to be corroborated by multiple studies now. The research indicates a notable link between mothers contracting COVID-19 infection during pregnancy and an increased risk of autism spectrum disorder, ASD, and other neurodevelopmental issues in their children later on.
An increased risk. How significant is the increase, and how confident are researchers in this link?
The studies report statistically significant elevations in diagnosis rates for conditions like autism among children whose mothers had confirmed COVID-19 during pregnancy, compared to control groups of children whose mothers did not. While correlation doesn't automatically equal causation, the consistency across several studies strengthens the hypothesis of a real link.
So what's the proposed biological mechanism? Is the virus itself crossing the placenta and directly harming the developing fetal brain?
That's generally not thought to be the primary mechanism, although direct infection can't be entirely ruled out in all cases. The leading hypothesis focuses on the mother's inflammatory response to the infection.
The immune system's reaction.
Exactly. The significant viral infection, like COVID-19, can trigger a powerful systemic inflammatory response in the mother, a flood of immune signaling molecules called cytokines. The concern is that this maternal inflammation can potentially cross the placental barrier or otherwise influence the fetal environment.
And that inflammation disrupts the baby's brain development.
That's the worry. The fetal brain undergoes incredibly complex and precisely timed developmental processes. Exposure to excessive inflammatory signals from the mother during critical developmental windows could potentially disrupt these delicate processes, increasing the risk for neurodevelopmental conditions like autism later in life. It's the indirect effect of the maternal immune activation that's the main focus.
That makes sense. It's not the virus itself, but the body's response to it. What does this mean for pregnant individuals now?
It strongly reinforces the vital importance of taking precautions against COVID-19 infection during pregnancy. This includes vaccination, which is recommended for pregnant individuals, as well as continuing sensible measures like masking in high-risk environments and avoiding exposure where possible. The goal is not just protecting the mother's health, but also minimizing the risk of that potentially harmful inflammatory response affecting fetal development.
So, another reason why vaccination during pregnancy is considered so important by health authorities.
Precisely. It's about reducing the risk of severe infection and the subsequent intense inflammatory cascade. Continued research is obviously needed to fully understand the risks and mechanisms, but the current data strongly supports prevention.
Okay, a crucial health warning there. Now, alongside COVID concerns, other respiratory viruses are also causing problems, particularly RSV.
Yes, the sources highlight a significant waves of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, infections currently sweeping across the United States. RSV can cause cold-like symptoms in adults, but it poses a much more serious threat to infants and young children.
Why is it so dangerous for babies?
Yeah. In infants, RSV can lead to severe lower respiratory tract infections like bronchiolitis, inflammation of the small airways, and pneumonia. Their airways are tiny, so inflammation can quickly lead to breathing difficulties, requiring hospitalization and sometimes intensive care. It's a major cause of infant hospitalizations, especially during the fall and winter months.
Is there anything parents can do? Are doctors recommending specific actions?
The primary recommendation, especially emphasized now with effective options available, is vaccination. There are now RSV vaccines approved for pregnant individuals to pass immunity to the baby, and monoclonal antibody treatments available for infants themselves, particularly those at high risk. Doctors are strongly urging uptake of these preventive measures to protect vulnerable babies from severe RSV illness.
So multiple respiratory threats circulating, demanding vigilance. And finally, turning to the UK, there are alarming reports about the state of emergency healthcare.
Yes, the charity Age UK, which advocates for older people, has raised serious alarms about conditions in hospital A&E, accident and emergency departments across the country. They describe the situation based on reports they've received as involving heartbreaking suffering.
Heartbreaking suffering is strong language. What specific issues are they reporting?
They cite extremely long waiting times for assessment and treatment, leading to terrible situations. Their report includes disturbing allegations of patients, often elderly and frail, effectively dying in hospital corridors while waiting for a bed or critical care.
Dying in corridors, that's shocking.
It is. They also report instances of patients being left for hours in soiled clothing due to overwhelming staff shortages and lack of basic resources to provide dignified care. It paints a picture of an emergency care system under unbearable strain, failing to meet even basic standards of care for vulnerable patients.
What's causing this crisis? Is it just lack of funding, staffing?
It's likely a complex mix of factors that have been building for years: chronic underfunding, severe staffing shortages exacerbated by burnout and recruitment issues post-Brexit and pandemic, difficulties discharging medically fit patients from hospitals into social care, which creates bed blocking, and increasing demand from an aging population. It points to a need for deep, systemic reform, not just quick fixes.
A stark warning about healthcare system resilience or lack thereof. It feels like we've covered a huge amount of ground today.
We really have. From the micro-level secrets of whale DNA to the macro-level dynamics of Earth's magnetosphere.
Through the complexities of AI competition, market volatility, political gridlock, nuclear tensions.
The very real human impact of natural disasters and healthcare system failures. It's a snapshot of a world facing immense challenges and opportunities simultaneously.
And one thing that really stands out, connecting many of these threads, is this tension between the speed of discovery and change and the inertia of our established systems.
That's a great observation. Scientific revelation, like understanding consciousness better or mapping the magnetosphere's weirdness, seems to be moving incredibly fast. Technological potential, like room temperature superconductors, feels almost within reach.
But our political institutions, like the U.S. Congress stuck on the filibuster, seem paralyzed, unable to even agree on basic funding, costing billions in the process. Our global diplomatic structures struggle to manage rising tensions.
We see venerable institutions, like the British monarchy, forced into drastic actions like stripping titles to adapt to modern scrutiny. We see deep societal divisions, like the draft conflict in Israel, resisting easy solutions. Old foundations are definitely being challenged everywhere.
And the cost of not adapting, of institutional resistance, is becoming increasingly clear, whether it's measured in billions lost during a shutdown or, tragically, in human lives lost due to inadequate healthcare or unresolved conflicts.
So, tying this all together, we see nature itself from the atom to the cosmos, revealing layers of complexity and dynamism we hadn't fully grasped. The biological rules of aging might be bendable. The rules of planetary protection are more complex than we thought.
Which leads to the final thought we wanted to leave you with today. If the very foundations of the natural world are proving to be more fluid, more intricate, perhaps more volatile than our old models suggested, how well equipped are our current systems, political, economic, social, to actually keep pace?
Are institutions designed for the kind of rapid adaptation that seems increasingly necessary? When scientific breakthroughs promise radical new efficiencies like superconductors or demand new global cooperation, like managing space weather, can our current structures respond effectively? Or are they too rigid, too slow, too caught up in old procedures and conflicts? So the question for you to consider is this. As you look around your own world, your workplace, your community, Maybe even your own way of thinking. What old complex system do you see that feels like it's cracking under the pressure of modern reality? What established foundation is resisting a necessary update, perhaps at considerable cost? It's about connecting these global trends to our own context, because understanding the world is the first step, but applying that understanding, recognizing the patterns, that's where the real value lies. Keep digging, keep questioning, keep diving deep.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.